Hello there, my name is Mark, otherwise known as Grandy, and I am the creator of SheetsIO. This video is going to be an introduction to the tool, starting off with a brief background on how and why I made it, and then move on to how to use the program, which will include an end-to-end first-time configuration step by step, and then you'll have a look at one of the spreadsheet setups that I currently use as kind of a use case for SheetsIO. Over the past few years, I've done a bunch of broadcasts for events as well as on and off streaming on my personal channel. During these, I've used a number of tools for populating the more dynamic elements on the screen with data. Prior to making SheetsIO, I'd used several small UI tools for creating text files, macros for local Excel sheets into text files, systems for populating web-based graphics with data from either a Google spreadsheet or a more complex solution like NodeCG. I had bounced around these for quite a fair time, each of which had their different perks and their different limitations. The small UIs almost always only worked for text. The Excel sheet macros obviously require Excel and don't work on OpenOffice. And the web-based graphics always required a reasonable level of HTML, CSS, JavaScript knowledge to set up, which, even though I have, still takes quite a long time to set up. Out of these, Google Spreadsheets seem like the best option as a data source, since it's collaborative, it's free, and it's simple. And outputting files on a local file system seems to be the best, or at least the most open-ended way to bring assets into OBS, as it gives complete control and freedom to position things and style things there, or in another app or use case entirely. And thus SheetsIO was born. You give it a spreadsheet, tell it which cells to point at which files, and let it update either manually or on a loop, whose output can then be slotted into your broadcast program of choice. There's two steps for setup. The first of which you only ever need to do once, and that is to get a Google Sheets API key from Google. Unlike previous versions of the Google API, which are now no longer in use, the latest version requires an API key to monitor how many calls it makes. SheetsIO on auto-update makes a request every 2 seconds, which is well within the rate limits, which I'll link in the description. To create the API key, you'll need to head over to the Google Developer Console. From there, create a new project from the drop-down in the upper left, give it a name, create it, go to Credentials, create credentials, and choose API key. This should give you an API key you can use in the application. When you load up the app, you'll notice that there's a handy little box for the API key. Slot it in there and press save. It will then validate that it can connect, and will save it in a small application.properties file alongside the exe. If you ever want to copy your SheetsIO application to another folder or system and want to use the same API key there, remember to copy this file across with it, or you'll have to reinsert it and save again in the new place. Step 2 is to create your configuration file. SheetsIO uses JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, a very widely known format that's human readable and simple to learn. The application needs to know a few very simple inputs and then all of the mappings from your cells in your spreadsheet to files on your system. At some point in the future, I hope to create an easier way to populate this config, and if I have, I'll link it in the description below, but for now, we'll need to write some JSON ourselves. Each project you create a configuration for will produce separate folders within the Files directory. The project name in the config is used to name that folder. Worksheet name corresponds to the specific tab on the workbook you are using. This is important, as SheetsIO can only look at a single tab of your workbook at any time. It's a limitation of the Google Sheets API. More advice on structuring things will come later in the tips section. And lastly, spreadsheet ID, which corresponds to the ID you'll find at the end of your spreadsheet URL. While getting this from the URL, make sure to also alter your sharing options on your sheet so that anyone with the link can view. Otherwise, the application will not be able to access the data within your sheet. Then comes the cell configuration array. Each cell requires a name, a cell reference, and the rest is optional. Cell is the cell reference, for example, A4. Name is used for the output file, for example, caster1 name. If all you put is this, is to take the value in A4 and output it in your files/project name folder as caster1name.txt. However, there are a couple of optional parameters for other use cases. File extension is either a TXT, which is the default if not provided, or an image file format for now at least. For example, if I had a link to a remotely hosted image placed in cell A4 and named the cell Team1 logo and put the file extension as PNG, it would take the text in A4, treat it as a URL, download that image, convert it to the extension you gave, and save it within the project's file directory. You can also use a local file address from the producer's computer, so long as you prefix the file path with the file : /. Lastly, there's the pad option, which is used for text files only. This takes the cell's value and adds an arbitrary amount of spaces to the end of it. Say you set its value to 10. It would take hello there and output as hello there with 10 spaces at the end. This is especially useful for marquee text that would otherwise have no spacing between the start and the end. And that's all there is to it, really. Set aside a cell in the sheet and add it as a cell in the config. Once you're all set up and saved, browse to your config from the app and click the Update Now or check the Auto Update checkbox, and you should see your files appear and update inside your files directory. If you ever have any problems, please check the troubleshooting guide on the wiki, recheck the steps from the guides there, or raise an issue on the GitHub repo. All links for that will be in the description. I have written a detailed wiki page going through everything I'm about to show you step by step. There's links below. But for the interest of showing what can be done using these tips, here's my spreadsheet backend for my Age of Empires 2 1v1 streams. So here it is. I have this main tab, which is where SheetsIO is monitoring, and also where all of my controls are. And I have side tabs for data lookups and anything else I might need or do. Notice that I've color-coded it. Black is for background, yellow is for something that we can alter, white is for neutral or just labels, and red is for things that once we've set up, we should probably never touch again. Usually some kind of formula that we never want to lose. And as mentioned, I have some formulas in here to help link data together, all of which use the $ absolute references for the cells. Drop-downs are made using the data validation tool that Google Sheets gives you, and the values within that drop-down update when the lookup area you provide it is updated. So if I go onto Lookups tab, add a team name in, and then go back in, you'll notice that the drop-down has that value in it, which is really, really nice. And with some lookups, you can also link data to your inputs, which is what I've done here for civilizations and colors. So when you change this drop-down, it looks up that value from within the grid of cells that I provided it, and returns the value from the column you tell it to give you. So I just have a column for names and a column for outputs, basically, in the lookups tab. And that automatically gives me the right value when I change the drop-down. A more common usage of this kind of thing might be to have a team name linked to a team logo. And considering how quickly it is set up, it's just all part of why using Google Sheets and having some basic Google Sheet knowledge is so good when using this. I also have these buttons. The buttons themselves are just drawings, which you can insert quite easily. But you can also attach scripts to drawings. So I have recorded macros, which are basically just me copy-pasting the contents of various cells around in the sheet, and attach that macro to these buttons, which allows me to very quickly fix team names being the wrong way around, or getting the civs or colors the wrong way around, or resetting certain parts of the sheets to what I want it to be if it's just empty. And lastly, although not strictly to do with broadcasts, this also shows how you can interface with web-based tools. In this case, I use the civilization names and plug them into a compare tool online. And so every time I update the sheet, a new link is made available to me. It just concatenates it into a link that I can use. So that's super easy as well. Hopefully all of this has enabled you to get an overview of the application, get set up, and have all the basics you need to know to put it all to good use. As mentioned, this has quickly replaced all of the other data tools I was using with OBS, and I plan to update this tool as time goes on. So do watch the repository on GitHub for new releases, and do send your feature requests my way through the Issues tab in that repo. If you need any further assistance, feel free to reach out to me. I am Grandy #0243 on Discord and GrandyB93 on Twitter. Best of luck!